Welcome, everyone, to another monthly town hall. I'm going to bring everyone up real quick. We have an exciting agenda ready to go. So, today we're going to be talking about release updates, we're going to be talking about caching, and we're going to be talking about ultimate forms. And I think that's everything. Got a good lineup. Awesome. So, I'll start with Josh. Just brought Rob and Toby on so you can look at their faces. But Josh has been running release for us the last few months, and just want to hand it over to him to have him talk through some of the updates that have gone out with the most recent patches and minors.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. There isn't so I'll share here. Woohoo! Can you share that? Can you see that okay, Amy? Is that all right?
Yes, we're good.
Okay,
Thanks.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, so we had just a couple patches and a minor release. So there's nothing too flashy, but I'll go through a couple of things. So yeah, so we had a couple fixes for some of the templates we generate when you create your project and when you use things like the scaffold generator. So that was 751. 760 was the next minor that was out with some interesting things here. So if you're like into using the kind of latest and greatest stuff, you can use the new experimental React compiler with this new command we have set up. So if you're using, you need to be on like React 19 and things like that. At least we kind of expect it from this setup command. So if you're using the Canary version of Redwood, you'll kind of be already kind of set up for that kind of thing. And then a few other kind of tidying up most things here, like a couple deprecation notices and again some more kind of docs fixes and things like that. One thing to point out on 760 is just the massive amount of dependencies that are upgraded. So there's some interesting ones here. So if I can find Prisma in this big crazy mess of things, but Prisma should be here somewhere. Yep, there we are. So there's some interesting features, or they had some features in their new or in their minors, so like create many for SQLite and things like that. And there's a couple other ones, GraphQL, Yoga. Yeah, I won't go through all of these clearly, but there's a couple of nice dependencies that you could probably get some new features of. 761, 762, addressing the same thing, little bug in the bare metal deploy, but fixed now. And 763, again, another fix in our serverless deployment, and there was a fix for the CLI generator command. So those are the kind of latest releases, and there'll be a 770 next week with some more dependency upgrades, features, fixes, things like that. Oops.
Sweet inception. You're good. Thanks for sharing. One thing we should do this in a town hall is just talk about everything that goes into release, because I think the whole release process that Dom worked out and David is super interesting when you're talking about branch strategies and trying to manage a bunch of code. So there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that people have no idea about. So just publicly want to thank you, Josh, for all the work that you're doing to just keep everything moving and fixing bugs and implementing new features.
Yeah, no, definitely building on the shoulders of giants with Dom and stuff. Yeah, so there we go.
Awesome. Next up, I'm going to bring Toby. So Toby has been leading the charge with SSR and RSC and is going to talk about some of the new things that we've been working on with Bighorn.
Yes, and I'm not going to share my screen at this point. I'm just going to talk it through what we've been working on lately. We have been working on auth. We have been working on middleware, because those two go hand in hand now. So we have our own DB auth figured out for SSR, and we also have, like you all know, we have a whole list of auth providers that we support. But obviously we needed to get our own auth working first. And then we wanted to pick another one that's totally different compared to DB auth, so that we know that the general solution that we have will work for as many different auth providers as possible. So we chose to do Supabase as the second auth provider. So those two are the two that we support right now with SSR. So the work now is to get it working with React Server components as well. And moving those two over to SSR support means that they need to work on the server as well. because for SSR you do the initial render on the server, and obviously you can't have anyone like be able to access pages that are private. So when they go to do a full page refresh or enter a URL straight to a private page, we need to now check on the server if that user is allowed to access that page. And the way that works, or the way that worked before, was just in the client, and we had JWTs to keep track of auth stuff. Now that it needs to work on both the server and the client, we have moved to cookies. And to be able to intercept or to read those cookies, we decided to implement middleware. So both the dbauth and Superbase, they use middleware now for authentication, and that's what we expect to be using for all our auth providers that we want to support going forward. And that's also good news for React Server components, because those also obviously, as in their name, run on the server, and we'll need to also read those cookies to make sure that the server components can't be accessed if you're not allowed or if you're not authenticated. And what else? Yeah, so in doing this work, we also realized that we needed to restructure how we build for React Server components. And you might not notice even if you look for it, but the way it works now is that we first render all of the Redwood shell that's needed for the framework itself or in the logic in the framework, and then we render your app component, and we now inject the routes as a child to app and render all of that as client components. So we render the Redwood shell, your app, that usually has a bunch of React context providers, and also the router, like the router logic. All of that we render as client components. And then the router itself will render its children as server components. So any layout you have, any layout and at any level. So any nesting you have with sets, all of those layouts will be rendered as server components, and then the one page that you will eventually hit will also be rendered as a server component by default. But then, of course, those server components, those pages, they can have client components. So now we need to go back and render in the browser again. So we start in the browser rendering the Redwood shell, your app, and all the context providers that you have. Then we go to the server to render the layouts and the pages, and then probably going back to client again to render client components. And to make this whole back and forth work properly has been a lot of work and really, really difficult. But we think we finally got it, and as I said, we are now working on adding auth to the mix as well, with the work that Danny and DT mostly has been doing with working with SSR. It should hopefully be not too difficult to get working with React Server components as well. So yeah, that's where we are focusing our time right now with regards to React Server components. And next step for me is going to be caching. So that's what I've been starting to think about now. How can and how should we cache the responses that we get back from the server when we ask for React Server components, but also just generally when navigating between pages. So Amy, do you want me to do that now? Go through the caching, or should we wait?
We can come back to it. We'll add a little bit of suspense, no pun intended.
Right.
But I did just also want to thank you for the work that you've done. I know that it's been a struggle trying to get RSC and SSR, I mean, the whole team, to get things done, to get auth and all those pieces. If you are interested, I will take this as an opportunity just to advocate for the React Server Components working group. So you can use that QR code. It'll take you to a Google form and you can fill that out to participate. And so we've been adding people to a Slack channel that we have. And I would say, even if you don't have experience with React Server Components and you're interested, still go ahead and apply, because there's something there for everybody. For example, One of the things that you can do is you can just install the latest canary on your machine and make sure that that's working. What does that user experience looks like? One thing that I really appreciate about the Redwood core team is that we obsess over DX and trying to make sure that that's silky smooth, that it's intuitive, and that most importantly, it works for people. And so that is invaluable feedback. The more people that we can have testing that process and checking things out and providing feedback, the better the entire experience is going to be. So I'll pull that back up one more time, but check that out. That's a QR code for the React Server Components Working Group. Awesome. We'll see Toby back in just a minute to talk about caching. I'm going to pull up Rob. So this is a really fun one for me because if you have been paying attention on Twitter, I know tech Twitter can sometimes be entertaining and dramatic, but one of the things that came up recently was a conversation coming out of ReactConf. And this was a tweet that our good friend, we're getting audio on that our good friend Shan posted. He was having dinner with Sam and I think another Tailwind guy, but they were talking about Laravel specifically. The same argument applies to PHP, but talking about how why don't we have some of those similar things available to us within JavaScript, especially as we're moving into a serverful environment where you have data and information about the server and the models and the content that you're trying to get, but you still have to do all this form setup to be able to do any kind of CRUD. So create, read, update, delete, any CRUD operations within your application. So Rob took it upon himself, and I'll include a link to this particular blog post within the chat, to see if he could get a proof of concept working to get Rails-like form helpers. So it's an excellent blog post. So Rob's going to talk through some of the code. I'll take my screen down and let Rob share his screen. But it was a really cool opportunity to see this viral chat happening on Twitter and for us to be able to come back with yeah, you can do that stuff within Redwood.
Hello, everybody. Let me share my screen. How's my font sizes? Is that okay?
Let me pull you up.
Is that readable? People were complaining last time about my tiny fonts, so I'm trying to zoom in
Maybe
even more.
See what, you know what else I can do? I can also take our faces off, which will give you a little bit more horizontal space.
Oh, okay. Should we do that?
You're good to go.
Okay. Yeah, so after that tweet, I got inspired. I think I've mentioned this once or twice, but I'm an old Rails developer. Probably said that hundreds of times by now. So when that challenge came up, make it more Rails-like, that was right in my wheelhouse. So we did a little bit of that with the original form helpers that Redwood has now, but when you have to submit to GraphQL, you're a little constrained. You can't just do whatever you want, right? GraphQL wants very specific things in a very specific order. But now that we're looking at RSC and server actions, so forms can just submit to a function, you can do whatever you want. Now we're kind of back into the realm of doing these kind of helpers. So we don't have server actions working yet. That's coming soon. But I did the next best thing. So I just created a function in Rails, right? These were originally intended as serverless functions, but these are just URLs you can hit from anywhere. So API source functions form. And right now, all this does is whatever comes in, there's some magic that happens here that we're going to see in a minute. It transforms the values into JSON, and then I just parrot the JSON back. So you can see in the browser what you submitted. So the secret to all this is just a couple helpers here. So there's a helper called form width, and that's the same as the named one in Rails. And then fields for, and I'll show you how these work. And then you have a text field, a hidden field, a submit button, and those sort of use this context that's being set up. But it's kind of simple. It greatly simplifies your forms. So for example, this is the most simple version here. And this is, I'm trying to make this analogous to Rails, right? Where you have a model, your data is in something called a model. So in this case, we had a form with a doctor model, and here's what that model looks like. It's just an object that happens to have a property class name called doctor. So it kind of knows what this thing is. And it's just properties, right? ID, name, specialty. And if we view the source for this here, there's a doctor. And the form here, you just say form width, and you give it, this is just CSS class name, but you give it the model you want this form to represent. So that's going to represent the doctor model. And then you say the name of the fields, ID, name, and specialty. But when you look at the source here, it kind of gives it a special name. It uses doctor square bracket name. So this is a property of doctor. And then when you submit up to the server, and again, the server just parrots back what it got, you'll see that gets turned into just regular JSON. So you got a doctor with an ID and name and specialty. And this one over here is showing you there is no model in this case. This is just plain forms. And as long as you name the forms properly, so I had to name them manually here, right? There's no model attribute or no model prop in form with. You just give it the right name and the same thing happens. So as long as you name the fields correctly, you'll get back the same structure. Okay, so that's a very simple case. And oh, sorry, I was just saying this tweet too. Sam talks about his example that he gives is you can edit a doctor, their patients, and their appointments all in one form and just save them to the database. So that was my goal. So we'll see how close I can get here. Okay, so here's a simple form. So now we're going to have a nested form. So now we're going to have a doctor, the doctor model, and it has patients. He has a patient here. It also has a class name, right? Patient with properties. And you'll see here now, if we look at this, now it starts building up here. Now we go to doctor, patient, name. And you submit this and it comes back from the server. Hopefully you guys can see these responses. They're not too small.
I was going to say, Rob, why don't you bump up the font size just a little bit more?
Yeah, if I do it up here, is that visible? Is that okay? So this form here, right, doctor with a nested patient, you'll see the JSON doctor, and you got a patient. He's got his properties. And again, the same thing on the right. As long as you manually name the fields correctly, everything will work. Okay, and my buttons up here break when I zoom too much. Okay, so now we need multiple patients, right? So now we've got a doctor who has an array of patients. Patient, patient. And when you submit this guy, I've removed the unmodeled version on the right, just sort of simplify here. Now we're just kind of working out the models. And you'll see now here we have a doctor and he has a couple patients. And now this is still an object, and the key in this case is the ID of the patient that needs to edit. This is the same thing that Rails does. And this is so that it works with their active record model. So when you save it, it knows which patient you're trying to save automatically. And if we look at the code for that, right now we start getting into, you'll see this field here, fields for. So here's the fields for the doctor. And you're saying, okay, now I want to represent the fields for the patient. So I'm looping through each one, taking the patient, and I'm saying this is the fields for the patient. Index ID, that gives you this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these are the IDs here. And now I'm just saying, again, name and date of birth. But now it knows, oh, this is actually the patient's name and the patient's date of birth. And oh, the patient actually belongs to the doctor. So name the field doctor, patient, name, right? Okay. And then what about just straight up arrays? So I just want an array of phone numbers. These aren't sub records, right? These are just primitives here. And you'll see this, whoop. now it's getting too big here. Hold on. So this kind of has this syntax, doctor phone, and then if it's just open empty square brackets, that's an array. And then we save this, we'll see this comes back as a doctor with phone numbers, just an array of phone numbers. And then there's another level where you can have an array of objects. So in this case, here's all the cars that this doctor has. And actually, I didn't pre-fill this one. I think this is just a raw one here. But when I save it, you'll see we get a doctor with an array of objects of cars. And then finally, that gets us to the most complex here one. This title's wrong. Let's just say complex form. But you'll see here we have a doctor who has patients, and those patients have appointments. This is not the prettiest form that's ever been created, but we're just looking at the code, right? Just looking at the code. We don't care about the design. And in this case, this guy has 1 appointment, and this guy has 2. So if we come in here and we save this one, we'll see we have a doctor who has a patient, who has patients, I should say, and then the patients have appointments. And those appointments, right, those appointments also have IDs. And then on the server, now this is the next part. This isn't in place yet. But what if you could do this? So any of those forms, right, you're just going to find the doctor who has that ID, and you're going to update that doctor. So it updates the doctor's properties, and then any child. So it update the patients, and the patients have appointments, and those update. And this is now Rails. So you get these forms with the special syntax, and then you save them in basically 2 lines of code. And now you got Rails for JavaScript. Ta-da! This is coming soon. Technically, now we have an experimental, I don't know how many people know about this. We have an experimental package called Redwood Record that I did years ago. If you come in here to Redwood Record, you can actually see how to install it and set it up. So the very simple cases, like this most simple version here, you could actually do this now. This exact syntax would work. it doesn't, Redwood Record doesn't currently save nested. You can query nested, so you can say, doctor, oh, give me the doctor's patients, and it'll work, but you can't save them all in one call. But that might be coming soon. There we go. Rails,
Love
it's
it.
back.
Rails. I love it. Yes, we had a few comments in the chat talking about, it looks like we're using Rails helper or Rails helpers. I'm getting all my R's mixed up.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to highlight, because I know you love AWS, was somebody had mentioned Emilio. My apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but just a general question. Was talking about AWS serverless and saying that we no longer have that as an official supported provider, and asking if that's going to be supported in Bighorn. I think we're doing some work on our setup commands for deployment, right?
Yeah. So when you say they serverless, you mean the hosting provider named serverless that actually deploys to AWS? Is that what they're talking about? It's so confusing.
Not sure. Yeah, that is confusing.
I think it's still in there because I just saw in Josh's update there was a fix in one of the patch versions for the serverless deploy option. So I think it's
okay. Okay, perfect. Yeah, and this also shows my ignorance when it comes to all of the AWS services. But didn't you mention that if we have bare metal support, that I can pull Josh up? I saw him. If we have bare metal support, that also helps with AWS support, right?
Yeah, I mean that's when I originally created bare metal, the bare metal deploy option. I was specifically doing it like for AWS, but it works for any bare metal server, which is it just SSHs into the server and uploads the code, builds it, and starts your server up. And cool. AWS is a very convenient way to do that. But if you had your own server in some random data center somewhere, you can use that exact same deploy option and deploy your site to it. It works great. It's not serverless. There's no Lambda. It's not like, coordinating Lambdas and stuff like that. It's purely just like run all the code on a server. And you can have multiple servers. If you have multiple copies on a load balancer, that all works with bare metal. It's great. It's the best option ever. Everyone should use it.
I love it. Love it. Yeah. And Ryan Quinn made a comment on YouTube as well. There's Flight Control as well, which is a great partner. So if you're not familiar with Flight Control, I can find a link. We had them come on as a partner and pitch their product, but their services sit on top of AWS and make it really easy to deploy there and kind of give you controls. One of the things that's really interesting about Flight Control is they want to make AWS easier, but you will also have like ejection or the ability to like pop open the hood and configure things a little bit more than some of the other tools that sit on top of AWS.
Yeah, I believe with Flight Control, right, you basically give it your AWS credentials. So you're deploying to your own AWS account. You're still in 100% control of everything. They just simplify the interface because when you first go to AWS, it's a little overwhelming how many options and services and stuff they are. So they simplify that quite a bit.
That's right. Awesome. Josh, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, just other than the serverless deploy provider, that's definitely deprecated by us. We have contributors do contribute fixes and we accept them, of course, but I don't think we're going to further work on it. But of course, we're trying to make it easier to deploy in general.
Yeah, and as David said, deprecated does not equal dropped. So very cool. Okay, so I know everybody has been waiting suspensefully to learn more about caching. So I'm going to bring Toby on and talk about some of the exciting stuff with caching.
Yes, thank you. Just to come back to the serverless provider and deploy providers and auth providers and so forth in general regarding and in particular regarding to Bighorn, we will probably at first focus on just a few. Like I mentioned, we did dbauth and Supabase for now for auth, and we might stop there for now. We are in talks with Clerk as well because we know they are super popular and it's a great auth providers, and we are talking to them and they might come in and help us do an integration with them. So that might happen, but it's the same story with deploy providers. We're going to do one or two to start with. So the very first release of Bighorn will probably not have all the same options as you do with current versions of Redwood, just so you all know. And serverless, the company, and the deploy provider is one of those that probably won't make it for the cut for the first version of Bighorn, if any. As we said, they are deprecated, which means we will drop them at some point. Currently, you can still use them, but at some point we will drop support for them because it's as I think David mentioned in the chat, they never actually really work all that well. Okay, yeah, that's that. Now caching. Now let me prepare here. Okay, cool. I'm just going to share my entire screen. It's always easiest. Boom. That's not what I wanted. Okay. So yeah, this is our kitchen sink do-it-all demo application. It's ugly, but it has all the latest features that we were working on. So here I have some. I have different versions of this. This one, if I'm hopefully, let me double check. If I'm running the right one, this actually does not have caching. So let me just double check that. This is the no cache. Perfect. So this is if you have tried React Server Components with Redwood, this is what you would have been trying, and this is the no cache version. And it's actually not that bad. Like if you go to about, that's that. Like you probably barely noticed any delays here. And if I go back to home, I mean it's. Did that even work? Let me try again. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Yeah. So as you can see, I can navigate between pages here, and it's actually not that bad, even without any caching at all. So I was pretty happy with this until I needed to do something a bit more complicated in one of the server cells. So in case you haven't looked at this particular example before, the navigation up here is a layout. And as I mentioned before, layouts are executed on the server as React Server Components. And in this layout, I also have a server cell. So you all know cells, our GraphQL cells that we've had from day one. Now we also have server cells that run inside server components. And we wanted to make sure that you can still use those inside layouts. So that's what we have here. It's basically reading the source of itself. So this is the source for the server component that is also rendering here. The server cell that is also rendering here inside the server component. This is the end of the layout, and down here we have a page. And this page also has client components, because anything that's interactive needs to be a client component. So this counter here, for example, is a client component, yeah, as it says right there. Okay. But okay, coming back. I, in some other project, need to do something that took a bit longer than just reading a file and serving it up inside the server cell. And that's where we really noticed that we needed some kind of caching. So to emulate that, I'm just quickly gonna introduce a artificial delay here. I'm also gonna zoom so you all can see what's going on. So I just set a timeout here for 3 seconds. So every time we read this file, it's as if that file took 3 seconds to read, basically. And then we return it and render it in the code block. So now coming back here and refreshing, you can see it says reading file up here, which is the loading state for this server cell. So it says that for 3 seconds, and then the actual content of the file comes in here. And now when I navigate between pages, so now if I go to About page, it has to read that file and load it. And going back to Home, read that file and load it. Going back to About again, as you can see, this is kind of horrible user experience. And it's also like, why why do I need to read this file again? It's the same, and just switching pages. We shouldn't need to refetch the cell data up here in the layout. So we need to come up with some kind of caching solution. But before we do that, I also wanted to show just the page down here. If we disable caching and also throttle a little bit, this part of the screen is probably difficult to see, but I'm turning on fast 3G throttling. And now I'm gonna reload the page, so this is gonna take a while. It's loading all the assets. And yeah, there it's done. Okay, so on the first load, it actually, you don't see any flashes or anything because this is now rendering with SSR support. So the user will get a fully rendered page back first from the server that has been SSR server-side rendered. So the first navigation just takes a while. Now I was already on the page, you didn't see it, but if you imagine you came from another page and come here, it will just sit there while all the resources are downloading, and then it will pop up. But so yeah, no things popping in and out, no flashing or anything. But if I go to about, I don't know if you had a chance to notice, but down here it said loading. So that's why I needed to enable throttling here. So when it downloads the server components for the page, that also takes a little while, and you get a loading indicator down there. Again here, loading, and then whilst if you like a little bit later, things pop up. So we have different layers here. We can cache and control cache for individually. But the first thing that we implement was what I call full page caching to solve the issue with the server cell up here in the navigation layout. This shouldn't take, like the first time, of course, it will take 3 seconds because the file is now very slow to read from disk. But once you have it, there's no need to refetch it. So I can switch to turn it off and then turn this one on instead. Serve this one. Okay, cool. Okay, I'm gonna unthrottle. This is horrible to wait for. Cool. So yeah. Now when I click here, you can see there's no. I still have that same 3 second delay, but it's instant. Like you don't see any loading here because this part of the page is now cached. So this is great. The one fun thing though with caching, as you all know, it's one of the most difficult parts of of computer science in general. It's naming caching and time zones, or two of those three people usually mention. So right now there's no invalidation of this at all. Once this is cached in your browser, it's cached forever. And for this use case, that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. This file never changes, so there's no need to invalidate this cache. But if you have joined our previous town halls, you have probably seen where we demoed our new docs site that we implemented with React Server components. And for the docs site, we generate the navigation menu, so similar to what we have up here, based on files on disk. So a new article or like a new page for the docs page is just a markdown file. We find all the markdown files and generate the navigation tree. Now imagine someone adds a new page. Now you probably do want your server cell that reads those documents to find the new page and include it in the dynamically generated navigation menu. So we definitely do need some sort of way to invalidate caching. We are currently thinking of 2 ways at least, but those two cache invalidation strategies is like the first two I implement is probably going to be just a simple timeout. So we will maybe set the default even of like 30 seconds, 5 minutes. I don't know where we will land, but so the cache lives for 5 minutes, for example, and then next request after that will have to refetch from the server. And we also want to make that user configurable, so you can control what your default timeout should be for the full page cache. So that's one strategy. And then we also want to make it possible to, when you click a link, tell it to always refresh. So for example, if this was a dynamically updated menu, maybe as soon as you click a new page up here, you want to refetch and recreate the menu. But when you just navigate in the page internally, you don't want that to happen. But if you do have any other cache invalidation strategies that you would like us to implement or to think about, please let us know. As I said, I'm right now starting to implement that. So now would be the perfect time for me to take any feedback into consideration, so I can add the caching invalidation strategies that you need for your projects. And if you have tried Next with server components and have any ideas from how they do it, please let us know. Good, bad, any input is super valuable. So that's full page caching, and that's as far as I have come in my implementations. But there's one more thing that I wanted to just mention. So I'm gonna switch to my code here and open up the routes file. So you can think of this full page caching as happening on the router level, because that's where it is. That's where it is right now. But we don't have today nested routing. But if you have ever used, which I guess you have, a traditional Redwood app, you know that if you have layouts and you just navigate in pages between pages inside the same layout, that layout doesn't get re-rendered, and anything about it also doesn't get re-rendered. So if you just switch between new users, edit user, new user, list users, stay inside here, the navigation layout and the scaffold layout, they will not re-render. And that experience is something that I want to recreate also with server components. So I'm thinking of putting a cache on the set level as well. So we will have one cache up at the router level for the whole page, but then also be able to have individual caching strategies for different sets here. And again, please let us know if this sounds like a reasonable idea to you, or if you see any problems with this idea. As I said, I haven't started implementing this yet, so and I haven't even given it that much thought. So I'm sure there are some traps here that I would rather avoid, and I would love your help finding those traps. And a bit more technical on the caching. I don't know if you have read the new React docs. They speak of caching in their docs because this is something new. It says right here, this is only for Canary, which is as of now actually passed both Canary beta and is now in RC. But so, yeah, React 19. If you're using React 19, you have access to this new cache function. So this was new. React Server Components is kind of new, so I thought they would go hand in hand, and this is how I started implementing caching. But this cache function is actually, and now they have docs, so now you can read it yourself. It's only for React Server Components. So this cache function is something that you, as a user, should use, for example, inside your server cells or any other place where you fetch data. So you place it outside your functions or outside your server cells to cache any fetching that goes on there. So this is good for you to know. This was a bad choice for me because I tried to use it on the client, and that was not a good experience. Did not work at all for caching React Server component, for caching the RSC navigation stuff that was going on there. So our cache right now is just a simple map. Yeah, I'm not even gonna show you, but we can look at the rows here. So the key is the URL plus any additional search parameters that you might have. So as long as the URL is the same, you get the same cache back. And it's just a map. So that's the key to the map, and the value is a promise that will eventually resolve to the actual page. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, and this cache, as I have maybe not made super clear, but the cache is client caching. So I said it lives forever. Yeah, forever as long as you stay on the page. If you do full page refresh, like if I do Command R here, the page reloads, and then that blows away the cache. And now you have fresh stuff again. Let's say you had a page that actually had a server cell in the navigation, or like in some layout, and you know that it will basically never change. And further optimization that you could do is to store this cache inside, for example, local storage, and then reload it back when the page loads. So then you don't even get the initial 3-second delay on the first page load. You can just read it from local storage if the user returns to the page. So that's also something that we probably won't do by default, but totally something that we could offer as part of Redwood caching. So yeah, any ideas, wild ideas that you might have, please let us know. Would be great to hear what you think about this. Best idea is probably to find me on Twitter. It's toby.dev, Toby DOTDEV, on Twitter, and just message me there, and I'll read it and reply. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Toby. And I was going to pull this up real quick, just so people know exactly where to find you. But you have, here we are. There's your handle. So I think most of the people on the core team are pretty active on social and things like that. So if you want to connect with Toby, and again, I will also highlight the React Server Components Working Group if you're interested in contributing. Sweet. Excellent. Well, I think I'm going to pull everybody back up. So, but just want to thank everybody for coming and hanging out. There's been some great chat within the chat window talking about features and things that are available within Redwood. And it's exciting just to see all the progress that's been made on Bighorn and React Server Components and SSR, and just all the features that we are able to even offer now within the stable version. Sweet. So thanks, guys, for presenting. And we will have another town hall in July. And just another great way to connect if you're interested in getting updates sooner and faster is to join our newsletter. So if you go to redwoodjs.com, sign up for the newsletter. We are sending that out fortnightly. I'm bringing that term back. So every other week, you'll get an email in your inbox of the latest and greatest things that the team's done. So thanks again.